Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto married Ino Yamanaka in the future. 16-year-old Ino is stuck in the body of her older self. Now she must embark on the journey of an adult, a wife, and a mother while deep down she's still just a child herself. What does the future have in store for her? Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 17, I Bruise Easily. Naruto didn't say another word. Ino sat in silence as she pondered on the fact that Chuji was also gone from her grasp. So many of her peers were dead in this world, it depressed her. Of course, Asuma was alive, which was good, but a team without Chuji, Ino couldn't imagine what Shikamaru must go through every day. Shikamaru, Ino sighed. She wasn't going to press this subject further now. She was far too shocked and hurt to find out the story behind Chuji's death right now. Tomorrow she will find out. She will visit Shikamaru and ask him. They can mourn his death together then. Ino woke up just when the sun's rays peeked in through the window. She groaned and turned around, coming face to face with the sleeping Naruto. His mouth was open and he was drooling, and he snored very softly. It was cute. Ino smiled and watched him for a while. Naruto grumbled, then moved slightly and grabbed hold of Ino's waist and pulled her closer to him. She was about to shriek, but thought better of it and lay absolutely still. She waited, he was still snoring softly, so he was asleep. She laughed to herself. Ino stayed like that for a while, not wanting to wake Naruto. She closed her eyes and tried to rest a little while longer, but sleep never came to her again. After 20 minutes she opened her eyes and looked up. Naruto was still sleeping. She lifted her arm and reached to touch his face. He was so soft and warm. She smiled warmly as she ran her fingers gently over his skin, then his hair. She pulled away, suddenly realizing what she was doing. A blush crept to her cheeks. What was she doing? Naruto's eyes fluttered open and he yawned. He noticed that Ino was in arms and pulled her even closer. She blinked and looked into his blue eyes and noticed he was awake. Her blush intensified. Naruto smirked. Good morning, Ino mustered to greet. Morning, was Naruto's sleepy reply. He reached up and pulled his fingers through Ino's short hair. She closed her eyes at the soft touch. It felt so comfortable being in his arms and having him touch her like this. She never knew Naruto was the affectionate type. Footsteps echoed in the hall and then a small blonde boy jumped on the bed and forced his parents apart to snuggle in between them. Naruto looked disappointed, but he smiled when Minato greeted him. Morning, son, Naruto returned the greeting. Can we bake cookies today? Minato asked. Naruto laughed. Ask your mother. Minato turned to Ino and gave her two large puppy dog eyes. She laughed and pulled her son closer and placed a wet kiss on his forehead. Minato pulled a face and wiped his forehead. Ino chuckled. I assume that is a yes, Naruto stated. Ino nodded. Yay! Minato exclaimed happily. He jumped up, bounced on the bed several times and then ran out of the room. Silence followed. Naruto and Ino glanced at each other, then they both got out of bed. The moment they had before was gone. Ino inhaled deeply as she stared at the door before her. She knew that she wanted the truth, but that didn't mean she was nervous about bringing the subject up. She knew Chuji's death would have affected Shikamaru in many ways and she didn't want to open old wounds. Taking another breath, Ino knocked. Temari opened the door. She was dressed in a purple nightgown and her head was covered with curlers. She was obviously dressing herself up for an occasion. Temari smiled when she saw it was Ino. Morning, Ino, Temari greeted. Shikamaru is in the kitchen. I assume you are here to see him. Ino nodded. Temari stepped aside and allowed her to come in. Ino looked around her awkwardly after Temari closed the door behind them and disappeared down the hallway. Ino decided to look around for the kitchen. It was easy to find, it was the first door on her left. Shikamaru was making coffee. Hey, Ino greeted. Shikamaru looked. His hair was actually pulled up into a ponytail today for a change. Hey, he greeted in return, what you doing here, Ino? We need to talk, Ino stated as she looked away, awkwardly. Shikamaru stared, then his eyes narrowed. Chuji? He asked. Ino nodded. Of course he would guess right. Shikamaru poured 2 cups of coffee. Have a seat. Ino sat down at the dining table. Shikamaru placed a cup of coffee in front of her and offered her sugar. She thanked him and added 1 spoon, then stirred. Shikamaru sat down opposite her and took a sip of his coffee. He didn't add any sugar. Yuck. Naruto told you? Shikamaru asked. Ino nodded. I see. I just want to know what happened, Ino whispered, don't overdo it. I don't want you to remember the gruesome details. Shikamaru have her a lopsided grin. Thanks for being worried, but death comes to all of us. Chuji's just was earlier than all of us thought. Ino smiled weakly. It was during the war, Shikamaru started. Ino had a feeling it was to do with the war. The enemy had gotten their hands on the second Hokage's forbidden technique and brought many people back to life. We faced lots of famous ninja, some close to us. Neji faced his father. Ino swallowed. Did Naruto have to face his? Shikamaru shook his head. No. The fourth sealed himself into the stomach of the Shinigami, which means he cannot be brought back through Edo Tensei. I think something similar applied to Kushina, though I'm not sure. Naruto faced others though, important people from his past. Itachi was one of them. Sasuke. He was there. He helped. I still can't believe Sasuke came back of his own will in this world. When Naruto told me, I was shocked. Shikamaru nodded. So what about Chuji? Shikamaru sighed and looked up at the ceiling. Well, we faced very powerful enemies. Some were familiar faces from Konoha. It upset him. But eventually he pulled through and awakened his hidden potential. He was finally able to be called the true heir of the Akimichi clan. Ino smiled. That's great. Shikamaru smiled. It was. He was so brave and strong. I don't get it, Ino whispered, if he was so brave and strong, how did the enemy get him down? Shikamaru's eyes darkened. One of the enemies was incredibly fast. You tried to transfer to him, but he dodged and attacked you from behind. He was going to give the final blow, Chuji jumped in front of you. Ino froze. He jumped in front of me? And it killed him? No, Shikamaru stated, but he had severe injuries. You tried to save him, but he lost too much blood. We couldn't move him. Ino looked down at her lap. Chuji died for her. Her heart clenched as tears flowed down her cheeks. He really loved you, Ino, Shikamaru stated. Ino nodded and wiped her tears away, but the tears continued flowing. She hiccuped. Shikamaru smiled weakly and handed her a box of tissues. He died a hero, Ino stated. That he did, Shikamaru agreed, that he did. 37-year-old days. Ino was getting used to being stuck in a teenager's body. The occasional urge to puke was annoying, but Ino fought it hard. She still found it strange that the bulimia had passed on to her, and that it evoked nausea. Although she had a feeling it had to do with the fact that the forbidden technique used on her was the cause of it. The technique, after all, was far from perfect and had risks. The person who used it was a fool. They were in for deep trouble, whoever they were. It was morning and Ino decided to skip breakfast and go for a walk. She needed to clear her head. Ino closed the front door behind her and turned to her right. The sun was still rising, so many streets were quiet and shops were still closed. It was fresh and crisp morning, perfect for a walk. Ino looked up at the sky as she walked. There were only a few clouds and birds were flying overhead, probably looking for food. Ino closed her eyes and inhaled the fresh clean air. She missed her home, her old life and her husband. She wanted to go back, but she could not do anything at this time. She really needed Naruto to remember about the technique, but knowing him, it could take years. Ino chuckled. Ino spotted Naruto running ahead of her. She frowned. He was up early, which was unusual for the blonde. She smiled and decided to run to catch up to him. By the time she reached him he had slowed down into a jog. Morning, Ino greeted. Naruto glanced at her and grinned. Yo. He greeted. Morning run. Ino asked. Naruto nodded. Ino smiled. He was so serious when it came to his training. Let me guess, you'll have ramen after this. Sure will. Naruto beamed. Ino rolled her eyes. May I join you? Ino asked. Naruto seemed surprised, but then he grinned and nodded. The two jogged together into the morning. After they finished their ramen, Ino stretched her arms over her head, her short shirt riding up a little. She hated the thing now, but she couldn't exactly change her style out of the blue, people would notice. She could feel Naruto's gaze on her and she smirked. What you doing today? Ino asked. Naruto blinked. Oh, I don't know. Probably more training. Ino nodded. Right, of course. Say, you wanna hang out tonight? Naruto stared at her. Ino placed her hands on her hips and waited for his reply. He blinked, looked to his left, then back at her. You mean, like a date? Naruto asked very carefully. Ino smiled wickedly. Yes, a date. A blush formed on Naruto's cheeks. Sure. Ino grinned, turned, gave Naruto the thumbs up and laughed. Great. See you at 7 at my place then. Then she disappeared around the corner, leaving a shocked Naruto behind. Meanwhile with 16-year-old Ino. Kaguya was back when Ino returned home from the cemetery. Shikamaru decided to take her to Chuji and Sakura's graves. She placed flowers on both of them and prayed silently. Now she felt much better and she was happy to see her daughter again. How was your mission? Ino asked as she put the kettle on for tea. Good, Kaguya stated, Sasuke-sensei gave me some scrolls to study. That's nice, Ino stated, is he a good teacher? He's a better leader, Kaguya stated, but he gets along well enough. Ino smiled and poured the boiled water into a cup. You also want tea? No, thank you, Kaguya stated. Ino joined her daughter at the table. Kaguya was reading the scrolls Sasuke gave her. She looked so serious as she scanned the scrolls. Ino was amazed. Kaguya was very serious when it came to her studies. Mother, Kaguya called out after 10 minutes of silence. Ino turned to her daughter, who had abandoned the scrolls and were now watched Ino. Yes. Sasuke-sensei said I need to improve my mind transfer technique, Kaguya stated. I failed on the mission more than once to actually properly harness the technique. Will you help me? Ino blinked. She didn't know Kaguya could use the Yamanaka trait, but she wasn't surprised that she could. Kaguya was her daughter, after all. Ino smiled. Of course. How about tomorrow? I'll tell Kana to take care of things at work for me. Kaguya smiled warmly. Thanks a bunch. I feel useless when I fail. Ino knew exactly what that felt like. Karen stared at herself in the mirror. She had on nothing but an old bra and black shorts. Her glasses were on her nightstand and her red hair was unruly and standing in all directions. She bit her lip and pulled on her bra straps, slipped the contraption from her shoulder until her breasts were visible. She stared in silence, then turned to her side and placed her hand on her stomach. Nope, she wasn't imagining things. Sasuke entered the room and raised an eyebrow at his wife's bare state. She turned to him and gave him a cold long stare. He blinked, and shifted his gaze to her breasts. How he loved those things, despite the fact they were small, but they were just right for him. They are swollen, Karen stated. They were, Sasuke could tell. They even looked bigger. So? I'm not complaining, Sasuke smirked. I'm pregnant, you moron. Karen sneered. Sasuke froze, looked up into his wife's eyes, then back down at her breasts, then lower to her stomach. Of course, he couldn't see a bump, but when he activated his Sharingan he saw a small flicker of chakra that did not belong to his wife. When? He asked. This morning, Karen stated, I realized my chakra was different. I sensed the baby for the first time. I'm probably only 2 weeks along, give or take a few weeks. Sasuke moved to his wife and pulled him to her. You are beautiful. Tisk. You're only saying that because my boobs are bigger. No, really, you are beautiful, even with small boobs. And I'm happy. You are carrying my fourth child. Yeah, thanks a lot, Sasuke. I just had a baby, now another one is on the way. Give me a break. Why are you so fertile, damn it? Sasuke laughed and kissed Karen's nose. I don't think it's me who is so fertile. Sasuke wiggled his eyebrows. Karen glared at him. Fuck you. Is that an offer? Karen slapped her forehead. Moron. Chapter 18, One is all is one. Ino sat down on the grass, motioning for her daughter to do the same. Kaguya hesitated, then sat down opposite her mother. Ino smiled and closed her eyes. Kaguya did the same and inhaled deeply, allowing the air to travel through her body and carry oxygen to her organs through her blood. She tried to release the tension in her muscles and imagine herself in a place she loved, surrounded by people she loved. This is the first step to being able to control yourself, Ino stated, coming to peace by meditation. Kaguya nodded, but did not open her eyes. Grandfather said something similar when he trained me too. Ino smiled. Of course her father would have said that, she had learned it from him. It was heartwarming, knowing her family wasn't very different in this world from her own. At least her older self also had a warm and open family. The thought was reassuring. Thank you for taking the time to train me, Kaguya whispered. I am your mother, Ino stated, it is no problem at all. It was strange saying that, even after all this time Ino has been stuck in this alternate life of hers. But she had come to accept the fact that she might be here for a while and in order to survive, she must carry on. Besides, she really did love Kaguya and saw her as her own daughter, which she kind of was. The two blondes sat in silence as the sun baked down on them, waiting for the right moment to move forward. Naruto was a busy man. Being the Hokage wasn't fun and games, after all. If he wasn't looking cool and heroic, he was cooped up in an office doing paperwork. Naruto hated paperwork, but he could not escape it, no matter what. Luckily he had clones to help him, even if it did use chakra. Naruto sighed and stretched his arms over his head. He spun around on his chair and looked out the window that gave him a full view of the village he loved and promised to protect. It was a sunny day with only a few clouds. Villagers were moving around, bustling and going on about their daily business. Naruto was happy to see such times of peace. A knock on the door shook Naruto from his reverie. He spun back around. Enter. The door opened, revealing his secretary, a young woman in her late 20s with long golden hair and blue eyes. She was efficient, but a bit clumsy. Nevertheless, she was a great help that Naruto needed. I'm sorry for bothering you, Hokage-sama, she mumbled, but the Kazekage is here to see you. Naruto frowned. Gaara didn't usually discuss business often with Naruto when he was here on his time off to spend with his family. This visit could only mean one thing, Gaara had found something in the archives. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Let him in, Naruto ordered, and bring us tea. The secretary nodded and closed the door behind her. Several minutes later, Gaara stepped into the office. He was dressed in a black shirt and pants, very casual, which was normal when he spent time with his children. Find something? Naruto asked. Gaara sat down and looked into his best friend's eyes. Naruto swallowed and sat forward. He knew that serious look in Gaara's eyes. He did find something. I found an old document, Gaara stated. Kankuro mailed it. It's a report from a scientist's theories on dimensions and space. Naruto frowned. Dimensions and space. Gaara nodded. Yes, something about the fabric of the universe that overlap sometimes and therefore two dimensions come together. I thought that it could perhaps assist with the problem. Naruto nodded. Gaara pulled out some folded papers from his pocket and handed it over. Naruto unfolded it and studied it silently. It was a very old paper and the dates on the reports dated back over 70 years. The scientist was most likely no longer amongst the living, so speaking with him was not an option. It sounds familiar, Naruto stated, his brows knitted together. Where did he hear of this before? The fabrics of the universe overlaps, he was certain that someone had told him about it, explained it in detail. But who? Naruto mentally cursed himself. How could he forget in such a dire moment? I will continue the search, Gaara stated, maybe there is more. Naruto nodded. Thank you, please do. Now go home and enjoy your last few days with Hinata. Gaara blushed lightly, then excused himself. Naruto sat back in his chair and sighed. If only he could remember. An opponent will never give you the opportunity to transfer to them, Ino stated as she corrected Kaguya's stance. They were practicing on a mouse that Ino got at the pet store. Ino wasn't usually fond of using animals, but they couldn't practice this kind of technique on a log. Right, Kaguya nodded. Ino smiled and stepped back, proud of Kaguya's strong posture. Your teammates are in charge of distracting the enemy and immobilizing them, so that you can grab them. Kaguya nodded. That's why we are always placed on a team with the Nara and Akimichi clans. They are the best suited to our ability. That's correct, Ino stated, but none of your teammates are from those clans, are they? Kaguya looked down at the ground. Ino frowned at her daughter's sudden look of sadness. Kaguya. Shikamaru's wife can't have children, Kaguya whispered, and Chuji didn't even live to have children. I will never be on a team with Nara or Akimichi clan members. Ino's eyes widened. It had never occurred to her that was the outcome. And to think it bothered Kaguya so much, it made Ino's heart clench. But you have adapted, haven't you? That's what every kunoichi must do, adapt to her new environment and social surroundings. Kaguya looked up and smiled weakly. You're right. And I don't really have to adapt, I never had such a team to begin with. I've learned to work well with my teammates, now I must just perfect my own technique. Ino smiled proudly at her daughter. She was so determined. All right, do it. Capture that mouse, but be careful, they have very sensitive minds. One mistake and you might kill it. Kaguya nodded, then focused, and executed. 37-year-old Ino. Ino stared at herself in the mirror. She looked so young and elegant in the purple summer dress she had selected to wear for her date with Naruto. She whirled around. It felt great to be a teenager again, because her skin was flawless. Well, mostly, she naturally had some scars from missions, but she hid them perfectly under the fabric of the dress. Even her breasts looked great. Her mother came in and looked surprised. Are you going out? She asked. Yes, Ino confirmed, how do I look? Beautiful, her mother smiled, is it a date? Ino smirked and winked. Her mother laughed, then narrowed her eyes seriously. Are you it is safe? Ino frowned. What do you mean? Ino's mother glanced to her side nervously. Well, you are my daughter from the future and from another dimension. Is it safe to become attached to the people from his dimension? Ino blinked. I don't know, but I can't lock myself up. I have to continue on like nothing has changed. If I become antisocial just to protect everyone, then people start to notice things, and then real problems could rise up. Like enemies attacking. Ino's mother nodded. I guess you're right. I'm just looking out for you. Have a good night. We'll talk in the morning. Oh, Ino breathed, you wanted to speak with me? Yes, her mother confirmed, but I don't want to spoil your night, so go and have fun. We will talk in the morning. Ino smiled. You are a wonderful mother, just like mine. Her mother laughed. I am your mother, silly. I just happen to be younger. Mrs. Yamanaka left the room. Ino's smile faltered. They might be the same woman deep down, but Ino still missed her real mother. Naruto was waiting outside when Ino came downstairs. She greeted him with a small hug, then pulled her fingers through her long hair while asking him if there was anything specific he wanted to do. Not really, Naruto mumbled, what do you want to do? Ino was surprised. You're not going to beg me to go have ramen. Naruto blushed. Sakura-chan said I shouldn't bring it up. Ino chuckled. So he went to Sakura for advice before this? How cute. Naruto was fiddling with his fingers as he tried not to look Ino in the eye. She smiled, but the smile faltered when Naruto gave her a sideways glance. It knocked her breath away. He looked so much like her Naruto when he did that. Ino looked down at her feet. Are you alright? Naruto asked. Yes, Ino quickly replaced her frown with a smile. Let's go to a tea house, then I have a place to show you. Naruto nodded and the two turned around and walked in the direction of the shopping district. After dinner, Ino led Naruto through the village until they reached the path that led all the way up to the Hokage monument. It was still strange to her, seeing only 5 faces, but she was slowly getting used to it. She missed seeing her husband's face overlooking the village. Why we going up there? Naruto asked as they walked side by side. Ino glanced at him and smiled. It is my favorite place, she stated. Someone very dear to me showed it to me. Naruto furrowed his brows. He was curious about this precious person of hers. He knew that she was bound to have people she loved in her life, but he had a feeling this particular person was different from others. Why are you showing me? Ino was about to open her big mouth and tell him that he showed it to her, and that she wanted to share something with him again, but she stopped herself in time. She inhaled deeply and looked on ahead of her, the moon acting as her guide. Because I want to, she whispered, because you are my friend. Naruto blinked, then grinned. Really? You're my friend too, Ino. Ino smiled and reached out to lock fingers with Naruto, but she stopped midway, blushed, and quickly pulled away. Naruto noticed this and was surprised. He's never had a girl reach out to him like that before. He was oblivious, yes, but he knew enough to know that she wasn't just reaching out for the heck of it. They finally reached the top and the view blew Naruto's breath away. It was amazing. The entire village was displayed before him, the lights shimmering in the darkness with the stars and the moon watching over. This was home. This was Konoha. Wow, Naruto breathed. Yeah, Ino agreed, wow. Why didn't I come here before? Naruto asked. Ino shrugged. Naruto laughed warmly. This is the village I will protect when I become Hokage. And it is beautiful. Ino chuckled. So energetic, just like she remembered. Naruto inhaled deeply and turned around to face Ino. He leaned against the railings that were in place for safety reasons for anybody who planned to do some sightseeing. His blue eyes locked on Ino and he watched her intently. She looked different, he didn't notice it before. Yes, she still had long hair, she still had the same figure and the same face. Nothing really changed, but at the same time something did. Was it her eyes? Or was it her posture? Or was it the entire way she carried herself? Whatever it was, Yamanaka Ino has changed and it intrigued him. You look different, Naruto stated. I feel different, Ino admitted. I don't mind the change, Naruto whispered, surprising Ino, you look nice. Naruto blushed as he said this and quickly looked away. Ino smiled as her heart leaped in her chest. Thank you, Naruto. Silence enveloped them, but it was comfortable. A warm breeze swept over them and Naruto watched in awe as Ino's hair gently whipped around her face. She really was beautiful, he never really noticed it before, since he was always so caught up with Sakura. But he knew Sakura loved Sasuke and nothing was going to change that, even if Sasuke doesn't return as the same man. Naruto knew Sasuke wouldn't look at Sakura ever, and he would be there when she realized that. But now as he looked at Ino, he wondered if it would be a romantic gesture. No, he would support her as a friend. At least, that's what he felt now as he watched the blonde before him. What are you looking at? Ino asked, her hands on her hips. Naruto laughed nervously and rubbed the back of his head. Ino rolled her eyes, then looked Naruto in the eye. They froze, blinked, and then both unconsciously took a step closer. Another breeze swept through and Ino had to pull her hair out of her face this time, but it did not stop her from moving closer to Naruto even further. He also moved forward and when they were both standing so close to each other, their chests were touching, Naruto leaned down and Ino raised her chin and their lips met. It was a short kiss, but when Ino pulled away, she felt giddy. Naruto felt the same. He had just kissed Ino. It was his first kiss with a girl, and it definitely was no accident. A blush crept to his cheeks and he quickly turned around to look at the village again. What was he going to do now? Ino felt a pang of pain when Naruto turned his back to her, but she pushed it aside and joined him. They watched the village in silence, until their hands slowly crept closer together and their fingers entwined. They were content. 16-year-old Ino. Kaguya sat down on a rock and sighed. She was tired and worn from a full day of training, but she was improving. Ino smiled and sat down next to her daughter. "We'll stop for something to eat on the way home," Ino said. Kaguya's eyes lit up. "Good. I'm starving." Ino laughed and patted her daughter's shoulder. The two blondes sat in silence, catching their breaths and calming down. They had a full-on training session, but the end results were going to be spectacular. Ino was very proud of her daughter. "You haven't been on missions lately," Kaguya stated. Ino bit her lip. "I haven't been feeling well." "Are you pregnant?" Kaguya asked, a sudden excitement to her voice. Ino laughed. "No, I'm not, sorry." Kaguya's face fell. "Oh, that would have been cool. I want a little sister." Ino smiled. How she wished she could grant that wish, but she really was not in a position to do such a thing. Besides, sex with Naruto, not something she wanted to picture at this very moment, especially considering the fact she was technically a virgin. Her body might not be, but her soul sure was. The thought made Ino shudder. "Thanks for training me," Kaguya thanked her mother. "I've always enjoyed training with you. You're the best." "I wouldn't say that," Ino laughed. "Your grandfather is much more dependable when it comes to the mind transfer technique." Kaguya pulled an annoyed face. "That's not true, and we both know it. You surpassed grandfather a long time ago. Dad even said you were developing a new powerful technique that could go beyond normal mind transfer." Ino smiled at her daughter's compliments. She wasn't so sure she was that much stronger than her father, and she certainly did not remember any new techniques she was developing. A new technique that would take mind transfer even further? Ino's eyes widened. Mind transfer, body swapping, isn't that what practically happened to her and her alternative self? Wasn't her mind now in the body of another version of herself? Could it be that she and her alternative self swapped bodies with a mind transfer technique? And if they did, how did it get into another dimension? Was that even possible? It was time she hit the books. Chapter 19, A Gentle Touch. Ino shot up, surprised that the sun was already sitting high in the sky and that the spot beside her was empty. She glanced at the clock on her bedside. It was already noon. She has slept an awful long time. Ino sighed and got out of bed, then made her way to the bathroom. She pulled off her pajamas and jumped into the shower, allowing the droplets to fall down on her skin. She rubbed shampoo into her short blonde hair, then scrubbed her body. After she showered, she pulled on a purple summer dress and brushed her hair. As she moved the brush through her short locks, she noticed a small black pattern on her underarm. She frowned and stepped closer to the mirror and investigated the black mark. It looked like a swirl, very much like the red one Konoha shinobi wore on their vests. It was tiny, which explained why she hadn't seen it before, but what was it? Surely it wasn't a tattoo. Ino knew that she would never get a tattoo, and if she ever did, she would not get it under her arm. Ino decided she would ask Naruto as soon as he came home. Ino made herself some toast and headed for Naruto's study, where she knew a bookcase stood with books that probably belonged to her older self. She was hoping that she would find something on the mind transfer technique, or anything about her family history that could give her answers about her new theory. Was it really possible that the technique that caused Ino to appear in her alternate self was a mind transfer technique? And if it was, where was her other self? But of all things she wanted answers to, she wanted to know why she no longer had the urge to stick her finger down her throat. It was almost like her bulimia disappeared into thin air. And she knew that was impossible. Bulimia wasn't cured overnight. It was, after all in the mind. Ino pulled out several books and moved to Naruto's desk. She sat down and opened the first one, a thick book with yellowing pages from age. It was filled with diagrams, some she recognized from her training, others she had never seen before. Her older self had scribbled notes all over the pages. Ino had to admit she was impressed. Her other self was very intelligent. Ino studied the book for hours, she was so drawn into the notes her other self had written down that she hadn't even heard the front door open and close. "What are you doing?" a voice made her jump. Ino looked up, but calmed down when she realized it was Naruto. He was dressed in his standard Jonin attire, his robe long taken off and placed on the coat rack. "I'm investigating something," Ino admitted. Naruto raised an eyebrow and approached her. He leaned over her to have a look at the book, and Ino couldn't help but feel intimidated by him leaning over her. She berated herself, she slept next to him, surely she should be able to handle standing this close to him. "Ah, the alternate dimension theory," Naruto grinned, "you were quite curious about that. Locked yourself up in here all the time?" "I did." Ino asked, knowing Naruto was speaking of her other self. He nodded and moved away from her. "Minato will be staying the night with Masashi," Naruto pointed out. "Karen will bring him home tomorrow, then you will go shopping." "I will?" Ino asked, surprised. "Karen says you need to get out and explore," Naruto shrugged. "Hinata's going too." "Great," Ino smiled, suddenly excited. "You want a fact for the day?" Naruto asked, wiggling his eyebrows. Ino laughed. "I do actually," Ino grinned, as she crossed her legs. "Who's Hatake Kana's mother?" Naruto was surprised by her question, but then he chuckled. "Shizune." "No way, really?" Ino asked, shocked. "Yes, really," Naruto grinned, "we saw it coming, it was quite obvious." "Anko wasn't very happy, though." Ino laughed. She was well aware of the chemistry that moved around Kakashi and Shizune when they were in the same room together, it was the same in her world too. And she understood the part about Anko too, the wild woman was madly in love with Kakashi, but maybe she was a bit too wild for him. "Can I ask another question?" Ino asked. "Sure," Naruto shrugged, it wasn't like there were any ground rules about the arrangement they made. "What do you think will happen when I go back?" Ino asked in a whisper. Naruto's eyes widened. He had never thought about the consequences that the strange transfer was to bring. Sure, he knew the future or past could change, perhaps, but he still wasn't sure about the nature of the events either, so what really waited for them on the other side of the bridge? "I don't know," Naruto replied, "I really don't know." "I have another problem," Ino whispered again, this time much softer than before. "What is it?" Naruto asked, noticed the worry on his wife's face. How he wished he could step up and pull her close to him. How do I put this, I'm bulimic, Ino confessed, ashamed. "Oh," Naruto's voice was crestfallen, "do you want me to contact a doctor?" "No," Ino replied, too quickly to her liking, "I'm supposed to be bulimic. Ever since the transfer I have not felt the compulsion to overeat or vomit on purpose. In fact, the thought of sticking my finger down my throat is almost disgusting." Naruto sighed in relief. "So? What's the problem then?" "Bulimia doesn't heal overnight." Ino shrieked. Naruto stepped back, surprised at her outburst. He sighed and stepped closer to her, reached out and pulled her against him. He knew he was possibly overstepping a boundary, but he could feel she needed comfort. "I'm sure nothing is wrong," Naruto whispered soothingly into her ear. "What if the transfer did something to me? What if I'm a completely different person now? What if your wife, your real wife is suffering now? What if she's dead?" Naruto's grip tightened, causing Ino to swallow her words. Naruto closed his eyes and inhaled his wife's sweet scent. He knew the woman in his arms was only his wife in body, not in spirit, but they felt so similar, so alike, it was frightening. He cared about her, and he did not like the fact that she was so afraid. "I'm sure everything is fine," Naruto soothed her, "I'm sure that your other self is out there somewhere, safe and working on a way to find her way back too." "I'm sorry," Ino sobbed. Naruto pulled away just enough to see Ino's face. A lonesome tear ran down her cheek and he wiped it away. "Don't cry," Naruto grinned, "big girls don't cry. I'm just very emotional right now." "I know." With 37-year-old Ino. Ino tossed and turned in the early hours of the morning, but the pain in her head would not subside. She sighed and stood up, a sudden wave of nausea hitting her. Surprised, Ino moved to the bathroom, in hopes that she didn't actually have to lean over the toilet bowl and puke her guts out. Luck wasn't on her side. Ino groaned and washed her mouth, then she stumbled downstairs. It was barely 6 o'clock, so everyone was still asleep. She poured herself a glass of water and sipped on it slowly. She sat down in the living room and pulled a blanket over her, the early morning freshness being a bit too chilly for her liking. When she finished her water, she lay down again and closed her eyes. Sleep did not come back. After an hour, Ino stood up again and went to the toilet. After she flushed the toilet, she stripped and climbed into the shower. As she rubbed soap on her arms, she realized her breasts were surprisingly sensitive when she brushed against them. Confused, Ino looked down. They were swollen. She blinked, then it hit her. But it couldn't be, could it? Alarmed, Ino jumped out of the shower and rushed to her room where she hurriedly got dressed. After she made sure she looked presentable, she dashed out of the house, apple in hand, and ran towards where she assumed the Nara family lived. When she knocked on the door, she prayed it was the right house. When the door opened, she knew she was at the right place. No one could look so dish-eviled in the morning. Shikamaru was not a morning person. Shikamaru yawned. Ino? What are you doing here? I'm going to ask you a very strange question, Ino said quickly, causing her friend to frown. Do you know if I am a virgin? Shikamaru would have choked had he been drinking at that very moment. He stared at his teammate, suddenly very alarmed. He was convinced it was a joke, but her expression was so serious. As far as I know you are, Shikamaru muttered. Are you positive? Ino asked. Yes, Shikamaru stated, you have been with a few boys, but none of them were serious enough for sex. Okay, Ino sighed, who was my last conquest again? Shikamaru was giving her an odd look. Ino knew she was probably giving a lot away, but she had to discover the truth and soon. If she was pregnant, she had to be sure which Ino the mother was, and then figure out how on earth pregnancy was drawn into this complicated situation. Was it even possible for her to carry her pregnancy with her from another body? Clearly there might be a lot more dangers to 5 dimensions to heaven than she bargained for. Ino, Shikamaru sighed, I doubt you are pregnant. Ino's eyes widened. She should have known he would deduce that was why she was questioning him. He was far too smart for his own good. I don't know, Shikamaru, Ino trailed off. What was she supposed to say? How about I take you to the hospital? Shikamaru offered. Ino nodded slowly. Yes, that was a good idea. Shikamaru sighed, so much for sleeping in. Wait in the living room while I get dressed. Sakura returned with a series of documents tucked underarm, he face drawn into a frown. Ino knew that look. Sakura was confused. Sakura put the papers down on the desk and sat down opposite Ino. Well, Sakura started, but trailed off, as if trying to gather her thoughts. Your assumption was correct, you are pregnant. Ino sat in silence. Oh hell. Now what was going to happen? Sakura seemed just as shocked and lost. I guess congratulations are in order. Ino smiled weakly. Sakura took the documents and flipped through them until she found a green-colored one. She scanned over it, then looked up into Ino's eyes. Something is bothering me, Ino, Sakura admitted. What is it? Ino asked. I had a look at your chakra system, Sakura explained, and it is disrupted. Almost like you are under a genjutsu. I've sensed this oddity around you for a while now. Ino bit her lip. Her chakra was disrupted? What did that mean? Is that a problem? Yes, Sakura nodded, it means that it could be harmful to the baby. Your chakra flow is not normal and therefore almost none is traveling to your uterus. I'm worried that the lack of chakra to assist with the development of the foetus could cause problems. Ino paled. This was not good. What do you suggest we do? Sakura sighed. I don't know. I've never encountered something like this before. I'll talk to the Hokage, but she might have to do research. But we will find a solution, I promise. Ino nodded. Meanwhile, Sakura changed the subject. I would like for you to take this information package and read it. It tells you everything about the 40 or so weeks of pregnancy and labor. Sakura handed a booklet over, which Ino took, knowing she didn't actually need it. She's had 2 children before and she was a trained medic. Nevertheless, she knew Sakura was giving it to her for ease of mind. I'll need to take vitamins too, Ino stated. Sakura nodded. You're taking this awfully well, Sakura pointed out. Ino smiled weakly and nodded. Being told she was pregnant was not a foreign concept. The only thing that worried her was the fact that this wasn't her actual body. And to make things worse, she knew nothing of what the transfer could do to the unborn child. What if she miscarried, or if the baby was born with a deformity? She would love it to bits, no matter how malformed the baby might be, but it still worried her. And what on earth would happen if she swapped back with her other self and left the poor unsuspecting 16-year-old pregnant? When Ino returned home, she headed straight for the pantry and pulled out as much food as she could. Then she collapsed on the couch and devoured everything her eyes could set on. Afterwards, she sat back and sighed. She still could not understand why she was having the bulimic tendencies of her other self. Clearly it was a malfunction, a negative side effect of the transfer, but Ino had always believed she had a strong will. Surely a petty disorder such as bulimia could not overpower her. Ino stood up and headed for the bathroom where she relieved herself. When she flushed the toilet, she scolded herself for wasting such good food. She really needed to see a doctor about the bulimia. The sooner she got over this, the better. She had another to feed now. With that going through her mind, she suddenly froze in realization. Could it be that the baby was actually hers? That she was pregnant with the child she had conceived with Naruto before the transfer? It seemed feasible. She did end up with the other Ino's bulimia, perhaps the baby traveled with her. The thought made Ino nauseous. She knew the dangers of 5 dimensions to heaven. She knew that it was dangerous, that it could harm, that's why it had been labeled forbidden. Horror pitted in Ino's stomach. What if the transfer killed the baby? No, Sakura would have noticed that. So the baby lives, but was it really out of danger? And if she were to reverse the technique, would the baby be safe in her real body? Ino collapsed on the ground and buried her head in her hands. What was she going to do? Everything had just gotten very complicated. Meanwhile with 16-year-old Ino. Karen knocked on the door the next morning just after 10. Ino opened the door and allowed the redhead inside, followed by Minato who was smiling widely. Hello Mama. Minato exclaimed as he threw himself into Ino's arms. She smiled and hugged her son tightly. He was so small, so worn and fragile. She loved him to bits. Karen watched with a smile on her face. Minato gave his mother a kiss, then ran upstairs to his room. He's a real Uzumaki that boy, Karen chuckled, full of energy. Ino smiled. So, shopping? Yep, Karen nodded as she made her way to the kitchen and sat down at the dining table. Ino watched amazed at how comfortable Karen made herself. How are you? I'm fine, thank you, Ino answered. Good, Karen nodded, your chakra is still disrupted, but at least you haven't fainted yet. Tea. Ino offered. Karen nodded, not bothered by the fact that Ino had changed the subject. Just as the kettle started boiling, another knock came from the front door. Ino knew it was Hinata, so she opened the door without hesitation and invited her best friend inside. The two moved to the kitchen. Hinata sat down, while Ino prepared the tea. How is your sex life, Hinata? Karen asked, no embarrassment present in her tone. Hinata blushed bright red, while Ino bit her lip. Now this was awkward. Ino joined the two ladies at the table with 3 cups of tea. All right, Hinata finally answered. All right? Is that it? Geez, is Gaara not satisfying you or something? Karen asked. Hinata's blush deepened. No. I didn't say that, Hinata muttered. Karen laughed. I'm pulling your leg, Karen chuckled as she took a sip of tea. Oh, I'm pregnant again by the way. Ino and Hinata's eyes widened in surprise. Congratulations, they said together. Karen thanked them, then muttered something about an overly fertile Sasuke under her breath. Hinata giggled. I think you're the more fertile one, Hinata stated, a devious glint in her eyes. Ino watched in amazement, she's never seen Hinata look like that. Karen raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Karen asked, surprised. Well, Uzumaki clan members are known for having very strong sources of life. Don't you think that would include making babies too? Hinata asked, wiggling her eyebrows. Ino burst out laughing at the absurdity of the situation. Hinata was being devious. She wished she had a camera. Karen blushed. Just because I'm from the Uzumaki clan doesn't mean I can make lots of babies. Where did you get that absurd idea from? Ino stopped laughing and stared at Karen, surprised. You're an Uzumaki? Ino asked, flabbergasted. Karen corrected, but yes, I am from the Uzumaki clan. Ino could not believe it. Right here before her sat a possible relative of Naruto. Well, they were probably only distantly related, but they were related nonetheless. The thought made Ino smile. Naruto had somebody else in the world, someone who shared his name. She was an Uchiha now. After they finished their tea, the three women headed out to the shops. They popped in at a few accessory stores, but did not buy anything. After that, they decided to spend some time at a clothing store. The store Karen and Hinata led Ino to was small and cozy, with colorful garments hanging from metal racks. The scent of vanilla hung in the air. Karen spotted a purple dress and was already in the fitting rooms to try it on. Hinata was browsing through a small collection of maternity wear, while Ino looked through the sundresses. She finally found a baby blue one with white flower prints. She ran her fingers over the soft fabric, mesmerized by the dress's simplicity. How could something so simple be so beautiful? A sudden force snapped through her. Ino stumbled backwards, her stomach churning. She dropped the dress, the hanger clanging on the wooden floor, which alarmed Hinata. Ino grabbed the first rack she could find and leaned forward. She felt like she was going to vomit and her palms were sweaty. Another strong force shot through her, this time painful. The pain settled in her back. Ino closed her eyes and tried to take a deep breath, but it felt like her throat was tight. And then she saw it. A flash. It was quick, so quick she barely saw it, but it was there. An image. She saw it, she saw herself, her older self, holding a small bundle in pink in her arms. Ino at first thought it was a dream, but when another image, clearer this time, flashed through her mind, she knew it was real. She saw the baby's eyes. It was Kaguya. Hinata placed her hand on Ino's shoulder. Are you alright, Ino? Yes, Ino breathed, tears flowing down her cheeks. I just saw something. A memory. You did? Hinata asked, alarmed. What did you see? Ino turned around, the tears still flowing, to look into her best friend's eyes. I saw my daughter's first time in my arms. Chapter 20, Printed Memories. Karen and Hinata decided to take Ino home. It wasn't as if anything drastic happened, all the young blonde saw was a memory, but Karen was worried it might cause her chakra to fluctuate. Hinata returned to Hyuga Manor, but Karen stayed by Ino's side. Her chakra remained disrupted, but nothing else happened. Ino seemed to be fine. More than fine, actually. The blonde was a bundle of smiling goo. She dropped her teacup, twice. Karen could do nothing but laugh, but deep down the redhead wondered if this was okay. If any of this was okay? Ino took another sip of her tea with a smile. She remembered her daughter's birth. It was so warm, the memory, it was like a butterfly fluttering in her stomach, in a good way. And although Ino felt so complete by seeing something so small, she knew it wouldn't last. After all, it wasn't her memory to keep. That night, when Ino climbed into bed next to Naruto, she fell asleep with a smile and dreamed of giving birth to her dear baby girl. There was no pain, no agony, just happiness. Contentment. The feeling of being filled with blissful emotion. For the first time, Ino felt complete in her new world. Naruto woke up alone the next morning. With a stifled yawn, he kicked his legs over the edge of the bed and stretched. Still half asleep, Naruto slouched his way to the study, where he found Ino's nose buried in old photo albums. What are you doing? Naruto asked, surprised she even found the things. 37-year-old Ino locked all the albums away in a cupboard, so that they wouldn't get damaged. Ino looked up, her warm smile from the previous day still on her lips. The smile reached her eyes. Naruto could not help but see his real wife in that smile. How he missed her. Looking at our wedding photos, Ino stated, and at the baby photos. Minato was so chubby. He's still chubby, Naruto shrugged. Ino giggled and turned her attention back to the photo album. Naruto's stomach growled, causing Ino to give him an odd look. He blushed and turned to leave the room, might as well make breakfast. Naruto! Ino called out to him. Naruto stopped and looked at his wife over his shoulder. Yeah? He asked. Ino was giving him a very strange look and it was worrying him. Was something wrong? If we don't find a solution, Ino started, causing Naruto to frown, but he kept quiet to let her continue. If we don't find a way to swap me back, is it alright if I stay? Can I be Uzumaki Ino? Can I be Kaguya and Minato's mother? Naruto did not know what to say. For starters, he couldn't say everything would be fine, because in reality it wouldn't. Her new identity could cause problems, especially if it did come to be a permanent change. And then, of course, there was the fact that this Ino was nothing like his wife. Of course, there were similarities, but he could feel the difference. It wasn't his wife in that body. Did Ino even realize what it meant to be his wife? She probably didn't, because she didn't even ask if she would be able to be his wife if the change was permanent. Naruto sighed. He was not in her heart, unlike their children. We'll find a solution, Naruto stated as he looked away. You won't be stuck here. Ino couldn't help but feel slightly rejected. Don't you want me here? Naruto closed his eyes. That's not what I meant. You heard what Karen said, you're unstable. Keeping you here is dangerous. Dangerous for who exactly? Ino asked, raising her voice a little. She knew the reasons, but she was purposefully burying them deep down, because she wanted to be here. She wanted to be with her children. For you, Naruto replied, calmly, what's wrong with you? Why are you so hung up on staying now? Ino bit her lip. I remembered giving birth to Kaguya. Naruto spun around, surprised. No, that was impossible. There was no way she could have his wife's memories, could there? She was a completely different person, another soul in a foreign body. Memories were in the mind, weren't they? How could she remember something that never actually happened to her? Naruto knew they were treading in dangerous waters now. Don't get attached, Ino, Naruto warned, you're already attached to this world enough. Getting into deep could cause problems. Ino stood up, enraged. I thought you would be happy. Don't you want your wife back? If I have some memories, doesn't that mean I can sympathize with you now? I can help you. You will never replace her. Naruto yelled before he knew what he was doing. Ino dropped the photo album in her arm. A pained expression crossed her face. Naruto felt regret pool in his stomach, then he turned on his heel and stomped away. They'd never argued before. Ino felt strangely empty as she bent down to pick up the photo album she dropped. She supposed arguing was normal for married couples, but she had never once argued with Naruto since she arrived in this world. She felt guilty. She knew she was pushing him. She knew she couldn't replace his wife. And she knew she couldn't stay here, but deep down she wished she could. She loved Kaguya and Minato, the thought of not being with them was painful. Ino collapsed on the chair and buried her face in her hands. What was she supposed to do? A knot formed in her stomach, followed by a very uncomfortable churning. Ino swallowed hard, but the feeling would not go away. She frowned and before she knew it, she was running for the bathroom where she puked her guts out. After she washed her mouth, Ino stared at herself in the mirror. For the first time since she woke up in her other self's body, she could see that they were the same person, but at the same time not. Ino closed her eyes and wept. Ino left the house. Breakfast had been silent and awkward, for Naruto was ignoring Ino completely. The children didn't seem to notice the tension, but Ino had a feeling Kaguya might have picked up some of the tension. It was a sunny day, and Ino wandered through the streets wondering what she could do to entertain herself. Requesting a mission was not an option, for then she would have to talk to Naruto and she was really not in the mood. Not only that, she wasn't even sure if her other self even did missions anymore. She could always go to work, but Ino didn't feel like working with plants either. So, she decided to wander, her eyes focused on her feet and she slumped through the village. She was so lost in her misery, that she did not notice the woman in front of her. Bang! Ino stumbled backwards, having bumped into someone. She quickly gathered her senses, looked up, wanting to apologize to the person she bumped into, only to see the face of someone she knew very well. A pair of dark eyes were watching her with a smile. Shizune? Ino asked. Shizune continued smiling. Hello, Ino. It's so lovely to see you. Ino returned the smile. Over the years Ino had grown close to Shizune, so seeing her, even in a different time or world, was comforting. Ino also couldn't help herself thinking about what she knew about this older Shizune. She was married to Kakashi, and she had a daughter with him named Kana. Strange how things turned out. I'm sorry I bumped into you, Ino apologized with a blush on her cheeks. Shizune shook it off. That's quite alright, Shizune said gently, everyone has bad days. Are you alright? Yes, Ino lied, thank you. Where were you headed? I just had breakfast with Kakashi, Shizune stated, he's off on a mission. I'm going to see Lady Tsunade now. Ino froze. Tsunade, she hadn't even thought of the previous Hokage at all since she arrived here. So she was still alive? Why don't you join me? Shizune offered. Ino agreed, a part of her wanted to see Tsunade again too. Tsunade was in hospital. At first Ino thought the reason they were headed to the hospital was because Tsunade was on duty, but it turns out the former Hokage and medic was a patient now. When they reached her room, Tsunade was reading a book about anatomy. Did you bring food? Was the first words that escaped her mouth. Shizune laughed and pulled out a packed lunch from her bag and handed it to the elderly woman, who Ino only now noticed did indeed look older than what she remembered. Tsunade immediately dug into the food like a starved man. Shizune watched with a smile, while Ino just felt confused. Oh, Tsunade finally said in between her bites of rice, hello Ino, didn't see you. Hello Lady Tsunade, Ino greeted with a bow. Tsunade gave her a funny look. Sheesh, formal much? Tsunade asked, haven't seen you so uptight in a while. How's the brat? Ino had to think who the brat was for a minute, but she finally clicked. Naruto's fine. Tsunade raised an eyebrow. Fine. Fine. Is he not getting it up or something? A blush crept to Ino's cheeks. Now that was not something she wanted to think about, or discuss, especially with an old lady. No, everything is fine in the bedroom. Not. Tsunade snorted and took another mouthful of rice. How are your children? Shizune asked. They are well, Ino replied. Ah, Minato's birthday is coming up soon, isn't it? Tsunade asked. Ino blinked. She had not known that. Just how far was her son's birthday? And how could she, as his mother, not know of it? Why didn't Naruto tell her? I'm surprised you remember, Lady Tsunade, Shizune laughed, you forget everybody else's birthdays. Oh, shush, Tsunade barked, I don't forget everyone's birthday. I just remember Minato and Kaguya's better because I delivered them. Ino froze. She had not known that Tsunade had been her midwife either. A part of her had always thought it would probably end up Sakura, but in this world Sakura was, of course, no longer amongst the living. Yes, Shizune hummed as she pulled a chair closer and sat down. How are you feeling? Excellent, Tsunade admitted, I feel like I can attack a horde of bulls. No, scratch that, I can attack a horde of Narutos. Ha! Shizune rolled her eyes. Ino didn't know what to think. She was starting to think that perhaps Tsunade had become senile. So, Tsunade started, a strange look crossing her face, how's Kakashi? Shizune blushed, then swatted Tsunade's arm. None of your damn business. Spoil sport, Tsunade huffed, you used to love gossiping about him. When did you become so conservative? When you admitted my husband is attractive and wanted to nude pictures. Shizune shrieked. Tsunade shrugged, while Ino's mind raced. Yep, Tsunade was senile. Tsunade noticed Ino's confused expression and laughed. It was a joke. She knows that, Lady Tsunade, Shizune snorted, she was there, remember? No she wasn't, Tsunade stated blandly. Ino froze. Could it be? Yes, she was. Shizune retorted. Tsunade's eyes narrowed and she motioned for Shizune to hush. Shizune frowned. Our Ino was there, Tsunade admitted, but not this one. Shizune was frowning now. What the hell are you on about? How did you know? Ino asked, ignoring Shizune. Tsunade smiled. Your chakra is disrupted. I've seen it before. Ino's eyes widened. You've seen this kind of thing before? Oh yes, Tsunade nodded. What is going on here? Shizune asked, glancing between the two blondes. Where did you see it? Ino asked, a sudden hope blooming. Could this be the answer? Would she finally be able to go home? Would this be the blessing she needed to apologize to Naruto for the argument they had that morning? I'm a medic, Ino, Tsunade stated. I take care of mishaps when they happen when someone is developing new techniques. Your other self was one of them. Ino did not understand. What was Tsunade trying to prove by mentioning the fact that her other self had attempted to create a new technique? What did have to do with anything? Tsunade chuckled again, clearly amused by Ino's confusion. Your other self came to me, with her entire chakra system disrupted, Tsunade pointed out, and memories and knowledge from another being was bleeding into hers. Do you understand now? I had to reverse those effects, for it was killing her. A deathly silence fell over them. The silence was broken when there was a knock on the door. It was Naruto. Chapter 21, 5 Dimensions to Heaven. It came to him when he was working on paperwork for the upcoming summit in the Land of Iron. Uzumaki Naruto dropped his pen in shock, then he quickly opened his drawers and shuffled through them until he found the small battered notebook that belonged to his wife. He stared at the cover for several seconds, then he pulled out the research Gaara had brought regarding dimensions. Could it be? Naruto quickly flipped through the notebook, skimming over the notes in a rush. Finally he found what he was looking for written in bold letters, followed by detailed explanations. He did not fail to see the large red print his wife had scribbled in much later, forbidden. Naruto could no longer just sit to the side. Why hadn't he thought of this before? The answer was staring him straight in the face. Naruto dropped what he was doing, tucked the notebook under his arm and scurried from his office. He had to talk to Tsunade. When Naruto approached Tsunade's room, he heard voices. At first he assumed that Shizune had come to visit once again, but there was a third voice, one he knew very well. Ino was here. Curious, Naruto pressed his ear against the door and listened for several minutes. They were talking about Tsunade's obsession with teasing Shizune regarding Kakashi. Naruto had to stifle a laugh. The old woman never left poor Shizune alone. However, the conversation took an interesting turn when Tsunade claimed that Ino was a different Ino. Naruto's eyes widened. So he was right. Not wanting to wait anymore, Naruto knocked on the door. He didn't even bother to wait for Tsunade's approval for him to enter. He opened the door and stepped inside, the notebook tucked under his arm. A deathly silence fell over the room. Tsunade was the one to break the silence. I thought it was you eavesdropping on us. Naruto blushed. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. Tsunade waved him off. How are you, brat? Fine, Naruto replied. What about you, Granny? Tsunade smiled. I feel great for a change. I can take on a horde of your shadow clones, I reckon. Wanna try? Naruto rolled his eyes. No, you're retired, remember? The doctor will kill me if I expose you to fighting. Tsunade huffed. Shizune and Ino laughed softly. So, what do you want, brat? Tsunade asked. Naruto lifted the notebook so that Tsunade could see. She blinked, then her eyes widened when she recognized it. So you realized it too? Tsunade asked. Naruto nodded. Tsunade chuckled. I'm surprised you remember. Naruto's expression darkened. Confused, Ino glanced at Shizune, but the older woman simply shrugged. She did not understand what was going on either. I did not want to forget, Naruto whispered. Tsunade smiled weakly at him. Ino felt her chest tighten. It was the first time in a while that she had seen such a painful expression on Naruto's face. He looked so emotional, his eyes were deep pits, endless, causing her to swim in them. Just what had happened that could cause such pain within him? Tsunade sighed and motioned for Shizune to fix up her pillows for her. While Shizune puffed up the pillows and aligned them behind Tsunade's back, the former Hokage pulled out a manila folder from the drawer beside her bed. She leaned back into her stack of pillows and opened the folder, flipping through the various papers. I've secretly been researching the phenomenon without your consent, Tsunade explained, but I am yet to find a way to reverse the effects. Ino interrupted this time. What are you talking about? Shizune and I are completely confused. Tsunade looked into Ino's determined eyes, then she glanced at Naruto. Naruto bit his lip, then turned to his wife. Ino, I'm so sorry. For what? Ino asked. I know how you ended up in my wife's body now, Naruto stated, causing Ino's eyes to widen in shock. I knew all along, but I had it buried deep within my mind. I didn't want to remember. You know what caused this? Is it what Lady Tsunade was trying to explain to me? Ino asked, hopeful, do you know how to reverse it? Naruto did not say anything for several minutes. Shizune was nervously glancing between the three blondes. She had a nagging feeling that she wasn't supposed to be hearing any of this. What did Naruto mean by Ino being in his wife's body? Were they not the same person? Naruto, Tsunade broke the silence, tell her the truth. Naruto sighed. It's called 5 Dimensions to Heaven. It's a forbidden technique that allows the mind to pass through various dimensions to take control of another body. It was never completed because of the negative side effects, and thus the reverse is not known. Ino was speechless. A forbidden technique? And one that could pass through dimensions? Was that even possible? Who could possibly have developed such a thing? Ino turned to Tsunade. Is this what happened to Ino? Is this what caused her to nearly die? Tsunade nodded. But didn't you heal her? Ino asked. Tsunade's expression darkened. No, the 5th Hokage replied. Ino woke up one day completely healed and free from the technique. We still don't know what caused it to reverse. Ino tightened her hands into fists. So did that mean she could not be healed at all? Was she stuck in this body until it suddenly decided to reverse itself? And if the technique was not completed when older Ino had another mind within her head, then does that mean the technique was now more developed, since she completely changed bodies? Naruto must have read her mind. Someone must have stolen the technique's notes and developed it further. Possibly even completed it, because this time the effects are far more developed than the previous time. Tsunade nodded in agreement. Who created this technique? Ino asked. Naruto and Tsunade glanced at each other, then they both turned to Ino. You did, they said in unison. Ino stared at the old battered notebook in her hands. Naruto had given it to her when they left Tsunade's room. You should have it, Ino. My wife created the 5 Dimensions to Heaven. Maybe that means you are the only one who can reverse it. After all, you are still the same person, although from different dimensions. Naruto had told her when he handed it to her. Ino still could not believe that her other self had developed something so powerful. And as she flipped through the notebook, Ino couldn't help but notice the similarities it had to mind transfer. Older Ino clearly used the basis of mind transfer to develop the forbidden technique. However, the further she got into the notes, she realized just how complicated the technique was, and the more she feared that she would never be able to find the answer. Meanwhile, with 37-year-old Ino, it looked like it was going to rain. Ino stared at the dark clouds hovering above her in the sky, then with a sigh she stumbled into the busy center of Konoha. She wasn't sure what it was, but something seemed off. Maybe it was just the terrible weather, or maybe there really was something eerie brewing in the village. As Ino passed buildings she knew, and ones she had never seen before, she felt herself longing for her own home. She missed being in her own body, with her family and her husband. She missed Naruto. His other self could never replace the man she married. They unfortunately had enough differences to almost be separate entities. However, Ino knew there was not much she could do at the very moment. After all, she had absolutely no notes regarding the 5 dimensions to heaven, so she could not immediately jump into deciphering the reverse. When Ino passed an old battered building, she froze. She turned on her heels and faced the building, alarms going off within her. She recognized the building, but she just could not remember where. Curious, she peeked through the fence, but it was quiet. Determined, she opened the gate and approached the front door and knocked. No answer. She peeked in through the windows, but the furniture was old, worn out and covered in dust and spider webs. Clearly no one lived here. Ino walked around the house to peek in through another window. The room was large and filled with empty racks. Ino recognized the symbol that was engraved on the wood of the racks. Her eyes widened. It didn't make sense. Why was Hyuga Astra's shop in such a state? And why was the woman, who was obviously much younger, not around when her shop clearly already exists? 16-year-old Ino. The next few mornings were uncomfortable for Ino. She was woken up by a terrible headache, followed by nausea. Naruto stayed by her side mostly, always rubbing her back when she was puking her guts out into the toilet and carrying water to her. Ino was grateful that he was by her side. This morning the nausea was 10 times worse. After emptying her gut for the 3rd time, Ino collapsed against the bathtub, her skin pale. Naruto watched her worried. "I'm sorry," Ino croaked, "I don't know what's going on. I just suddenly got sick." Naruto smiled weakly. "Don't apologize. I'm just worried about your health. You can't keep a thing down." Silence fell over them. Ino got up slowly and washed her face. She felt terrible, and she was really worried about her own health. She knew that her body was lacking the nutrition it needed, but no matter what she ate, nothing would stay in. At first she thought it was a bug, but now. Her eyes widened. No, surely she would have noticed pregnancy earlier, right? Ino turned to Naruto, her eyes wide. "Maybe I'm pregnant." Naruto frowned. "I suppose that's possible, but wouldn't you have noticed earlier? You told Sasuke quite a while ago that you were not expecting." "Maybe I didn't realize," Ino admitted. Even the best medic could miss some things. "I'll call Karen," Naruto stated, "she can check for any sign of the baby's chakra. Then, we get you to a medic." "Tsunade," Ino blurted out. "She's retired, Ino," Naruto started, but Ino interrupted by shaking her head. "And this pregnancy is a special case," Ino admitted. "This baby isn't mine, Naruto. I've never had sex before." Naruto blinked. He had not known that, but a part of him had suspected that might be the case. And although he knew it wasn't supposed to be an overjoyous time because of the dangers this pregnancy could pose, Naruto felt extremely giddy. He was going to be a father again. "No," Karen said blandly, "I do not sense another chakra, but there are traces of a foreign chakra. I've never noticed it before, I obviously was not diving deep enough." Naruto, Ino, Sasuke, and Karen were gathered around the Uchiha dining table. The children were playing outside with Suijutsu, who Ino was yet to meet. Naruto was frowning and appeared to be in deep thought. "Is it possibly a baby's chakra? Or remnants of it?" Sasuke asked. Karen shrugged, but did close her eyes again to concentrate on the chakra. After a few minutes Karen opened her eyes again. "It is similar to the remnants of chakra when a woman miscarriages," Karen admitted, "which means it could possibly be the baby." "Are you saying I had a miscarriage?" Ino asked, horrified. How could she have had a miscarriage without realizing it? Karen shook her head. "No, it is similar, but I don't think you miscarried. Perhaps you should get blood tests done." Ino nodded. Naruto had already contacted Tsunade, who immediately agreed to have a look. Naruto also contacted Shikamaru, since his excellent mind might be useful in this strange phenomenon. Silence fell over the room. Ino felt very awkward, so she turned her attention to the painting of the Uchiha family. "Hey, Sasuke, A male voice interrupted the silence, "Are there any more water flasks in the fridge?" Everyone's attention turned to a man with white hair that just stepped into the room. Ino did not recognize him. The male grinned, showing off pointy teeth. "Hey, it's the Hokage and his wife." "Hi. Suigetsu," was Naruto's greeting. Ino had a feeling that the man was Suigetsu. Who else would have come from the backyard that was an adult? Karen was pissed off. "I refilled all 40 of them this morning." Suigetsu narrowed his eyes. "Was I asking you? And 40 aren't enough. Refill your own flasks, moron." Karen hissed. "Bitch," Suigetsu muttered, then he turned around and stomped away. Sasuke merely rolled his eyes. Karen turned to her husband. "When this fourth baby is born," she moaned, "that idiot is moving out. I've had enough." With that, Karen stood up and stomped out of the room. "Should we go?" Naruto asked. Clearly those two have argued all day again. Sasuke smiled. Indeed, they had a food fight this morning. She'll get over it. She won't really kick him out, will she? Ino asked. Nah, was Sasuke's response. Ino wasn't so sure, so she excused herself from the table to go find Suigetsu. She found him outside with the children in the plastic pool. He really did love water, and the children seemed to love him. They were laughing and throwing water balloons at each other. "Oh, hi Hokage's wife," Suigetsu greeted. "It's Ino," Ino stated. "Right," Suigetsu nodded. "I just wanted to propose something," Ino started, but then trailed off. Suigetsu watched her and waited. Finally Ino shrugged her doubts off. "If you ever need any help, or a friend, or ever a house, please don't hesitate to come to us. Naruto and I would be glad to be of assistance." Suigetsu blinked, then grinned. "Sure, thanks. Wish all Konoha leaders were so nice." "What do you mean?" Ino asked, confused. Suigetsu's smile faded. "Sasuke, Karen, and I, we had another friend. A teammate. Without him, we're not complete, you know." "What happened to him?" Ino asked. "They threw him in prison," Suigetsu admitted, "declared him insane." Ino took in a sharp breath. "I'm sorry." Suigetsu shrugged, "No worries. Your husband has been fighting for his freedom. Maybe one day he'll be released and we can be a team again." Ino nodded, then watched as Suigetsu joined the children again. Ino and Naruto walked to the hospital together, greeting a few people along the way. Ino was thinking about what Suigetsu had told her. She found it very admirable that Naruto was fighting for their friend. Somehow she wished she could make a difference too. "Naruto!" Ino called out. Naruto walked slower, so that they would be walking next to each other. "Yeah," was his response. "Suigetsu told me about their friend," Ino admitted, "the one in the asylum." Naruto frowned, then his eyes widened in recognition. "Oh, you mean Jugo? What's wrong with him?" Ino asked. Naruto tapped his chin, "I wouldn't say there is much wrong with him. He has a brilliant mind, and probably the kindest soul I have ever met. So how come he is considered insane?" "I think that's just an excuse to lock him up," Naruto said. "People fear him, Ino. He is the origin of Orochimaru's cursed seal technique. Unfortunately his abilities tend to make him go berserk from time to time." Ino was surprised. She had not expected him to be the origin of Orochimaru's cursed seal technique. In fact, the memory of Orochimaru made Ino shiver. He took Sasuke away. "But he can be controlled," Naruto admitted. "Sasuke has the ability to calm him. Jugo loves Sasuke, they are like brothers. However, not many trust Sasuke either. So you're fighting for both of them?" Ino asked. Naruto nodded. Ino smiled. "I want to help." "Really?" Naruto asked, surprised. Ino nodded. She really did. She wanted to give Suigetsu something, and she wanted to allow Jugo and Sasuke to reunite. They deserved it. Naruto smiled at Ino warmly. "That's great." Ino returned the smile. "So, when do I get to meet him?" "I'll take you there as soon as I can get the permission," Naruto replied, "Unfortunately we cannot just show up, he is a special case." Ino nodded. Tsunade did the basic checkup, then she let a nurse take Ino's blood for testing. Ino sat by Tsunade's bedside, patiently waiting for the results, since the nurse claimed they would immediately go through the procedure. Shikamaru sat on Tsunade's other side. Finally the nurse returned with the results. Tsunade took the documents off her, and dismissed her. The nurse left. Tsunade flipped through the papers, her expression darkening, then she placed the documents on her lap and turned to Ino with a serious look. "You are pregnant," Tsunade said. Ino inhaled deeply, then tried to swallow the lump that suddenly formed in her throat. Shikamaru had his hands together, already thinking. Naruto, who had been pacing around the room, stopped and turned to Tsunade. "And it is hers, my wife's baby, yes." "I believe so," Tsunade said. "Ino here claims she is a virgin, so we'll take her word for it." "Women can become pregnant without penetration actually happening," Shikamaru admitted. "I have not been anywhere near a man's genitals naked either." Ino hissed, embarrassed. Shikamaru sighed, then nodded. "Is this a side effect from the technique, perhaps?" Naruto suggested. Tsunade frowned, while Shikamaru looked up at Naruto. "I think you might have caught something there, Naruto," Shikamaru admitted. "Perhaps this is some sort of side effect." "Karen said she could not sense the baby, right?" Naruto nodded. Shikamaru turned to Tsunade, "And you? Can you sense or feel the baby?" Tsunade shook her head. "It's there, but it's not. It's very strange." Shikamaru nodded. "Then perhaps, the technique does not transfer just the mind through dimensions." Ino felt her stomach drop. Silence fell over the room as all the blondes stared at Shikamaru in shock. "Are you saying that the technique can transfer tissue as well?" Tsunade finally broke the silence. "Well," Shikamaru shrugged, "I've heard of weirder things happening." Naruto was pacing again. "If that really is what happened, then my wife, 37-year-old, is currently not only in another body, but she also has our child there with her." "In essence, yes," Shikamaru answered. Naruto sighed and collapsed on a chair next to Ino, who was still frozen like a rock. "What are we going to do?" Naruto asked as he ran his hands through his blonde hair. "This technique is already dangerous as it is, now it has dragged an innocent life into it as well." "We'll fix this, Naruto," Tsunade whispered calmly, "I promise." Chapter 22, Reaching Out. "I have to leave for a few days," Naruto stated one morning at breakfast. Minato moaned, but one look from his father shut him up. Kaguya did not say a word. Ino looked up, curious. "Where are you going?" Ino asked. She doubted it was mission, the Hokage almost never left the village. "The Land of Iron," Naruto admitted, "there's a Kage summit. We have one very year." "Oh," was all Ino said for a while, then, "Do you go alone?" "I have 2 guards, Naruto replied, "and usually Ino, you attend with me." Minato and Kaguya were giving their parents odd looks now. Why did Ino ask about the summit when she went with Naruto every year? Why did Naruto talk of Ino as if she wasn't there? Naruto and Ino noticed the children's curious looks, so they changed the subject. Minato forgot about the event, but Kaguya wasn't one to easily ignore something like it. There was something going on, and she didn't like it. Naruto was in the study, having decided not to go into work until the afternoon. Ino knocked on the door and slipped inside. Naruto was studying a very old scroll. "Naruto?" Ino called out to him, hoping she wasn't disturbing him. "Yes." Naruto looked up. "Can I go with you to the summit?" Ino asked. Naruto blinked in surprise. "I thought you would like to stay with the children," Naruto said, but Ino shook her head. Naruto blinked again, then smiled. "Sure, you're welcome to." Ino thanked him and slipped to her desk. She gently moved her fingers over the notebook about the 5 dimensions to heaven, then she sat down and opened a book about dimensions. She had been studying the theory for days, but she still couldn't find any solutions. Ino has just gotten engrossed with her book, when Naruto called her name. She looked up, surprised to see him standing before her desk. She had not heard him move. He handed her a scroll. "What is it?" Ino asked. "Approval," Naruto stated. "You can visit Jugo now." Ino jumped up, excited. "Really? Thank you." And with her excitement, Ino pulled Naruto into a hug. He laughed and returned the gesture. The location of Jugo's cell was an isolated asylum on the outskirts of the village. The building was not very large, and went downstairs the minute you stepped through the door. Ino glanced behind her before descending into the unknown, feeling disgust at the fact that none of the patients probably ever saw enough sunlight. As she took a step down into the darkness, she realized just how dark the world truly was. She couldn't be an ignorant 16-year-old anymore. The reception area was small, with a glass wall separating the visitors from the nurses on duty. There was no waiting area. Ino nervously approached the reception desk and rung the small bell. A nurse dressed in a gray tunic entered through a heavy metal door. "How can I help you?" she asked with a forced smile. "My name is Yama, Uzumaki Ino," Ino introduced herself, stumbling over her name. "I am here to see Jugo." She handed the scroll to the nurse. The nurse opened the scroll and scanned over it briefly, then she wrapped it up and looked back up at Ino, her forced smile still on her face. "Indeed," she muttered, "wait here, Lady Ino. I'll contact the head nurse for you." The nurse disappeared behind the metal door. A few minutes passed, and the door opened again. This time a different nurse stepped in, also dressed in a gray tunic, but with a large red cross stitched to her bust. "Hello," she greeted. Her voice was warm, and her smile was genuine. "It has been a long time, Lady Ino." Ino trailed off. "Yeah." Ino wasn't sure how she knew this woman. Might as well go along with it. "Please," the nurse began, "step through." Mai opened the door that led into the glass-contained area. Ino stepped inside, not missing the sudden change in temperature. Mai closed the door behind them. "Could I ask you to leave all your belongings here?" "Of course," Ino agreed, removing her bag from her shoulder and tucking it in a locker Mai showed her. Mai then gestured for Ino to follow her through the heavy metal door. They were in a long corridor, painted white with two pot plants sitting against one of the walls. Further, there was nothing but doors. "Jugo never gets visitors," Mai explained. "That Uchiha boy has requested permission several times, but always gets denied. Poor thing, he loves Jugo very much." "Is Jugo really dangerous?" Ino asked. "Heavens no," Mai exclaimed, "he is misunderstood, that is all. I suppose he is dangerous when he loses control, but what people fail to realize is that he can be controlled." "Blinded by fear," Ino stated. Mai nodded. "Lord Hokage has been trying to free Jugo," Mai stated solemnly, "but the council has not approved any of his suggestions yet. He might be the highest-ranking officer, but the Hokage cannot really do anything alone." "Why did I marry a politician?" Ino asked. Mai laughed. They stepped in front of a door. "This is it," Mai pointed out. "Jugo just had lunch, so he should be reading now." "He reads?" Ino asked, surprised. Mai smiled. "All the time. It's all he ever does." Mai knocked on the door, then opened it and stepped inside. "Jugo," she called out to him, "there is someone here to see you. Can you spare a minute?" Ino stepped out from behind Mai, expecting to see a frightening sight, but she met something completely different. Jugo had a strong build, which did make him slightly intimidating, but he had gentle eyes. When he looked up from his book, The Tale of Genji, he seemed genuinely surprised, but also patiently calm. "This is Uzumaki Ino," Mai introduced Ino. "She is the Hokage's wife," Jugo concluded. Mai smiled and nodded. "Thank you, Mai." Mai nodded and excused herself, giving Ino a warm smile. An awkward silence followed. Ino remained where she stood, not sure whether she should sit down or shake hands with Jugo or something. Jugo felt very much the same. It has been so long since someone from outside came to see him, that he had no idea how to approach her. Ino decided to break the silence on a whim. "Is the food good?" she blurted out, only to realize that the question was absolutely absurd. A blush crept to her cheeks when Jugo burst out laughing. You are definitely his wife, Jugo said in between his laughs. I'm sorry, Ino muttered, embarrassed. I didn't know what to say. Jugo shook his head and closed his book. He moved from his bed and approached the small table in the corner. He gestured for Ino to sit opposite him. She complied, but not before looking around the room. It was empty, with only a bed, a table, and 2 chairs. There were no signs of it being home, there were no windows. It was a dark, empty abyss. Ino sat down, noticed that the chair was cheap and squeaked under her weight. Either that, or it had suffered torture from a mad being that swung it around. Ino glanced at Jugo. Could this calm, beautiful man truly be a monster, like everyone claimed he was? No, Suijutsu and Naruto had told her what he was like. He couldn't be a monster. Not truly. How is Sasuke? Jugo asked. Ino was surprised that he would ask that first. He is well. Karin is pregnant again. Jugo's features lit up, a 4th one. Brilliant. Ino smiled at his enthusiasm. Do you like kids, Jugo? Yes, he whispered. Do you have any of your own? Yes. A daughter. She was a baby the last time I saw her. Ino did not know what to say, but when she noticed the pained expression on Jugo's face, she felt guilty for bringing the topic up. It's all right, Jugo suddenly stated, I don't mind you asking. Ino smiled. Had he read her mind? Do you hate being locked up? No, Jugo replied after a few seconds' silence, no, I don't hate it. I prefer it. Ino frowned. Jugo noticed. It means I can't harm anyone, Jugo continued, this way, all I ever destroy are chairs. It's better this way. I'm a monster. Surely you don't really think that? Ino asked. Jugo smiled weakly. Something tugged at Ino's heart then. Maybe she pitied him, or maybe she truly felt something for him, but she knew she couldn't let him rot down in this dark cell for the rest of his life. He had a daughter. A child he obviously loved, but could never see or touch. What kind of parents could ever live without a child's smile? What's her name? Ino changed the subject. Jugo seemed surprised. Kazumi, Jugo finally whispered. Ino smiled. That's a beautiful name. Did you choose it? Jugo shook his head. No, I'm terrible with names. Shizuka chose the name. She was named after Shizuka's late lover, Sajiri. And you're okay with that? Ino asked. Yes. Shizuka will always love him, at least partially deep down in her heart. Ino smiled. And where is Shizuka and Kazumi now? Jugo closed his eyes, then turned his attention away and focused on the door instead. Ino bit her lip. She wasn't sure what to expect. I don't know, Jugo finally admitted, Shizuka is the leader of her village. She probably went back, and took Kazumi with her. Does she visit? No, she never has. Ino's heart ached for him. Is it alright if I come again? Ino asked as Mai led her outside. Of course, Mai agreed, come whenever you like. Ino thanked her, then slowly made her way back up the stairs, where she was greeted by the sun. Ino shielded her eyes from the bright light and looked into the distance. Konoha. Did the people even know the dark, dirty secrets of their own home? Did they know that every day, they practically walked over a prison? Ino was disgusted. She was going to make this right. Jugo deserved that much. Welcome home, Naruto greeted from the kitchen when Ino returned. Ino pulled off her shoes and made her way to the kitchen. She was exhausted, having stopped by work to check on a few things. Konoha seemed to have everything in order. How did the meeting go? Naruto asked as he added more salt to whatever he was cooking. It went well, Ino stated, but her emotions were not agreeing with what she said. Feeling a heavy weight on her chest, Ino approached Naruto slowly, stopping a few inches away from him. He watched her curiously, putting down the salt shaker and turning to face her. Ino. He gently called out her name, lifting his arm and gently caressed her cheek with his warm fingers. Ino closed her eyes and sighed at his touch. She needed to be comforted. Feeling bold, Ino took a step closer and buried her face in his chest. He did not tense. He merely sighed and wrapped his arms around her. It's okay. Everything will work out. He is lonely, Naruto, Ino muttered. He wants to see his daughter, although he didn't admit it out loud. But I could see it in his eyes. He wants to see her desperately. Shizuka too. I know, Naruto whispered, I know. Can't we allow him that? Just that little contact with his family for the time being. Ino asked, pulling away far enough to look Naruto in the eye. Naruto stared at her for several seconds, then closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against hers. I tried, Naruto admitted. I've contacted Shizuka several times. She never replied. Where is she? Ino asked. I'll contact her this time. Maybe she'll listen to me. Naruto smiled. You're not giving up, are you? No, Ino smirked. Sound familiar, never giving up. Naruto chuckled. A little, yes. Shizuka is the leader of Nadeshiko village. So she can come see Jugo? Ino asked. Yes. Ino smiled warmly, and before she thought it through, planted a soft kiss on Naruto's lips. His eyes widened, but Ino thought nothing of it and broke free from his grasp, returning to the study so that she could start writing a letter for Shizuka. In the silence of the kitchen, Naruto absently touched his now tingling lips. That's it for part 3. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.